Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I am joined by my friend Kat from the creativeintrovert.com. Most of you guys know Kat. She helps me gather all of the questions that you guys have, that you guys leave in the YouTube comments, that you email to me year round, and then we do these fun little Q&A episodes where she sort of interviews me, and we try to answer the questions that you guys have for us. I also want, before I hand things over to Kat for today, I want to remind you all that there are just a few weeks left. We're going to, I guess there's about 3 weeks left in my Kickstarter, where I fundraise the last 40 days of the year, and we're trying to get to 691 backers, which will beat last year's record. We're as of the time of recording this, we're at 569 backers. We're trying to get to 691, so we're coming down the home stretch, which is awesome. So if you enjoy my work, consider pitching in and supporting it. I really appreciate it. You can find the link to the Kickstarter in the comments section of this video or in the description of the video. When you pitch in, you can pick up a variety of different rewards that I offer, including a few different kinds of readings that you can pick up, or different kinds of exclusive bonus content that I create, and also half off to all of my online programs in 2021, which is awesome. So anyway, thank you all for your support. Really appreciate it. And thanks, Kat, for being here today. What are we going to talk about?
Yeah, it's great to be back. So today I thought we would talk about the difference between our sun sign, our rising sign, compared to other placements in our chart. So the reason being, I think a lot of us, when we first get into astrology, I know that this is the case for me, we come in through our knowing a bit about our sun sign, or thinking we do. So I guess that's my first question. Like, what does your sun sign even mean?
Right. Yeah. So, every era of astrology contributes something to the craft and to the practice. And modern astrology, say the astrology of the past 150 years, maybe, has its own contributions. And one of them has been the emphasis on sun signs. This was not a, the sun has always been a part of astrology. It's always been a really important symbol in astrology, but there's never been an emphasis on this idea that you are most identified with your sun sign until very recently. Some people point to Alan Leo. He's sort of one of the grandfathers of modern astrology for popularizing the importance of the sun sign. If you see a movie or, pop culture references, people say, "What's your sign?" And they're almost always referring to your sun sign. So, the emphasis on a person being identified with their sun sign position at the time of birth as the most personal or prominent indicator of personality or selfhood or something like that is relatively new. And it's not in line with the way that traditional astrologers practiced or thought about the sun pretty much for, several thousand years. That's not to say that the sun has no association with psychology or an understanding of behavior, or that it doesn't figure into our birth charts in a really important way. It's just that it's never been used in the way that it is now, in this really personal manner.
Okay, so and let's say traditionally, if like you were to say, this is my sun sign and I'm going to go to a traditional astrologer, what are they going to say about it?
Right. So there's a couple of different things that the sun can represent. The first one, which if you look into the background of Kat's room where she's speaking, she has a sign that mentions the daimon. So the daimon was the sun was associated with the daimon, which has a variety of different meanings in ancient astrology. And I think kind of unpacking that is essential to understanding what the sun is all about. The sun is like a it represents it was often equated with action or motion. And because the sun's motion through the sky is the primary motion that divides night from day, and its motion in a sense is defining the zodiac, the great circle of the zodiac. The ecliptic is the path that all of the planets travel along. So something about the sun defines the path of motion, or the course of motion or action. And the course of action for, say, the ancient astrologers, who were influenced by Plato, Pythagoras, other mystical groups, the course of action was rooted in the desire that each soul has for the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so we each take a course of action in our life based on ideas that we have that live in the soul, like images that represent to us what we think will bring us happiness, goodness, truth, beauty, etc. Now, because we are also said to be somewhat asleep in this material dimension, sometimes these images take on the quality of fantasies or dreams. Or, I mean, we all have a lot of different ideals that motivate our actions and our course of action in life, and not all of them are rooted in something. They're not all rooted in the understanding of the soul or the indwelling spirit. They're not all images, or they don't all indicate a course of action that will actually lead to lasting happiness. But nonetheless, reality is like a desire tree, always fulfilling us our desire to follow a course of action, like a choose your own adventure, book or something. And so the sun is related in a sense. It's Robert Schmidt, who translated a lot of the ancient source texts, said that the sun was a universal significator. And what that means is that it has this ability to speak to the course of action in life on the whole, as though it's connected to this ideal image toward which the life is moving, like the plot line in a book. What's the protagonist of a story motivated by? Some desire, some wish, some particular fantasy, or maybe an aversion, something that they don't want to happen. But the daimon, which is associated with the sun, is related to both that image and toward the spiritual currents or energies of destiny, or in some cases, even a spiritual being that guides us toward that desired outcome. So the sun is not who you are. It's, in ancient astrology, it's more about what you're going to do, or the shape of the life the shape that life will take. And that doesn't mean that everyone has some kind of that every fantasy or every life path is inherently good or healthy, or that it will end up the way that we think it will, because that life path, in a general, broad, universal sense, is also set into an environment of karma described by the moon, and predominantly, and also in the phase of the moon, but also the rest of the chart. And sometimes the path of the sun will be subdued in favor of other symbols. Just like sometimes people maybe don't have as well defined an image for their life, or a set of desires, or there's more apathy or lethargy around it, or sometimes disadvantages that come up that challenge the ability to follow that path or to achieve that end. So, but you wouldn't look at and then that's sort of your universal level of the sun. On a more mundane level, like a more basic level, the sun is going to represent, fame, rank, honor, greatness, mastery, elevated positions or notoriety, kings or rulers or queens. So the sun can also be associated with the father, and a lot of other things too that are much more specific. And symbols in astrology, of course, work like that. They can express themselves on both these broad philosophical levels and also in multivalent ways that are very, very specific. But you wouldn't really go in and say, I was born with the sun in Sagittarius, which is where it is right now, so I'm a Sagittarian. That kind of language is relatively new. It would have been a part of the approach of reading your chart, but it wouldn't have been the sole determiner of like your personhood or personality.
Okay, thank you. So something else that I think a lot of people will then, let's say they've learned a bit about their sun sign, but they know that there's more to their chart. The next place we often go, I know that I went there, was just to say, look at our rising sign. So what does that mean? What is our rising sign? How does that differ?
Yeah, I mean, the rising sign is actually in ancient astrology much more fundamental to the study of character and personality, behavior and psychology. And the reason for that is that the place of the rising of planets, stars, the sun in the east, the sign that's rising in the east is correlating to your appearance into the visible world out of your mother's womb, just like the stars are appearing in the east out from beneath the womb of the earth. And so it's that place that is most personally marking the native. It's like a little starry wand tapping you on the forehead, being like, this is what is impressed upon you. And it's not just it's the rising sign. In modern astrology, we tend to read a lot into signs. In ancient astrology, signs are ways of helping us understand what planets are talking to what planets, are governing what topics. They're more like lightning rods connecting things around the chart. They're conduits, and they don't take up the main they're not carrying the main interpretive thrust. So if you're a Pisces rising, it doesn't mean you're a Pisces. It really kind of means that you're a child of Jupiter, and perhaps in particular the more feminine, watery, double-bodied type of Jupiter. The fishes may play a role as well, but those are kind of secondary qualifying elements of character compared to the position of Jupiter in your chart, which will be the planet that's marking you, marking your birth, marking you most personally, or planets in Pisces in the first house. Those would be the things that you look to, and not just them individually, but their context in the chart. So you're a child of Jupiter if you're a Pisces, not Neptune, because obviously in ancient astrology, we have a system of rulerships where Jupiter has one feminine, one masculine sign, and the outer planets really don't belong to that whole scheme. I don't encourage people to use outer planets as sign rulers anyway, but you would look at Jupiter in the chart, its context. Where is Jupiter? Which house is it in? What aspects is it receiving or making? And its dignity, whatever else the chart might present about Jupiter, that's going to then take on primary significance in describing character, behavior, psychology, what Indian astrologers broadly call dharma in the first house. So that's the most personal placement that you would look to. And the reason that I always emphasize it to people when they're first learning astrology is that, ancient astrology is that you're so used to thinking of yourself as your sun sign. Most people are by the time they, come to study traditional astrology. But, if you take that and you just turn it, and if you take your sun sign and just turn kind of, okay, I'm just going to put you over here for a second, and I'm going to start identifying, if I'm going to identify at all with the chart, which I'm also, I tell people be careful of that as well. But look at your rising sign, look at the ruler of the rising sign or planets in the first house. And those placements in the chart, start thinking of yourself like that. For example, in my chart, I'm a Taurus rising, no planets in the first house. But I have the ruler Venus is in Leo in the fourth house. So Venus and Leo in the fourth house, and then you could trace it out a little bit. Venus is in Leo. It's not its home sign. It's disposed of by the sun in the sign of Leo, ruler of Leo, who in my chart is in Cancer. So sometimes you can also qualify it a little bit, like I'm a Venus in Leo with an underlying, sun in Cancer, stuff like that. But that's in addition to that, there were, as the tradition went on, there were ways of calculating temperament or constitution that would relate back to the rising sign, and also looking a little bit at the moon and Mercury. But predominantly, for the most personal take on your chart, you want to look at first house, rising sign, planets in the first house, the ruler of the first.
Okay, cool. That's clear. So a question, maybe just to really drive it home for people, what would be the difference between, let's say, a Pisces sun to a Pisces rising?
Right. Well, the Pisces sun, remember the sun is in Jupiter's sign, and it's going to be in a house. So according to the house that it's in, any other planets that it's co-present with in that house, any aspects being made to the sun, as well as the position of Jupiter, which is the host of the sun in Pisces. The sun is a guest in Pisces, and it's Jupiter's temple. So you have to understand what's going on in that sign. Are there any other planets there? Are there aspects being made to the sun? Which house is it in? And where is Jupiter? you put all of that together in order to give a sense of what the course of life is going to look like, what the plot line is going to look like, what topics or themes the native will pursue most dominantly. And there's other considerations that could mute that a little bit and make other things more important. For example, is it a daytime or a nighttime chart, or are there angular planets somewhere else that are speaking more loudly? Sometimes the path described by the sun can be a little subdued, and you may have candidates in the chart that actually could describe it better. But that's going to be the primary role of the sun in the chart.
Okay, cool. And one question that comes up a lot is when you're doing your monthly forecast to look at the astrology of the month ahead, and you go through all of the different signs, and these are for your sun or rising sign, but a lot of people just still aren't sure about which to read for.
Yeah, so I always tell people I encourage your rising sign, and there's a few reasons for this. One, as we've said, your rising sign is going to be what you're more personally identified with. Your sun sign is not. Two, rising sign horoscopes. All horoscopes are cast in like whole sign or whole sign houses. So ancient astrologers used whole sign houses. And if you cast your chart in whole sign houses, your rising sign horoscope is going to perfectly line up with where the transits are at in your birth chart every month. So let me just pull up a chart and show everyone, because I think it might help. All right, so let me put up the real-time clock here. So let's assume that you're an Aquarius rising, and this is an Aquarius rising chart right now on the screen. What I'm looking at right now are the transiting planets in the sky. So if I want to know where Jupiter and Saturn are falling, they're in Capricorn. If I'm an Aquarius rising, they're falling in my 12th house. The Sun and Mercury are in Sagittarius. If I'm an Aquarius rising, that's my 11th house, right? So if Venus is in Scorpio in my 10th house, and the moon today is in Aries in my 9th, and Mars is in, the moon is in Libra in the 9th, and Mars is in Aries in the 3rd. Okay, so if I'm an Aquarius rising and I'm tracking the planetary action for the month, these planetary transits are going to line up perfectly. I'm plugging them right into my birth chart in the way that they're actually transiting in my birth chart. Now, sun sign astrology is different. So let's say that you're an Aquarius rising, but your sun is in Sagittarius. Now what you're doing for the month is you're doing this. The astrologer is reading the transits. You're reading the transits of the month as though you're reading a chart with Sagittarius sun on the ascendant. You're an Aquarius rising, but what you're doing is you're taking your Sagittarius sun and you're putting it as though it's the first whole sign house in your chart. Now, this is essentially a modern invention. This is modern sun sign astrology. This is sun sign horoscopes. It's rooted in the idea that you don't read the monthly transits according to what the layout of your chart actually looks like, which is what you do with rising sign horoscopes. Instead, what you're doing is you're reading the transits of the month as though your sun sign is the first house and is on the ascendant. And so in this case, even though I'm an Aquarius rising, and the Jupiter Saturn, when I'm an Aquarius rising, if I'm reading it the way it actually is in my birth chart, it's Jupiter and Saturn in the 12th. But now if I'm reading it because I'm a Sag sun and I've got Sag in the 1st, that Jupiter Saturn is going to be in the 2nd. Now, someone would ask, well, why would anyone do that? And that's kind of my point exactly. Why would anyone do that? This is why I think rising sign horoscopes are far superior. But to be fair, there's lots of different modes of divination, right? There's astrology at the end of the day is a form of divination. If you want to read as though basically what you're doing with a sun sign horoscope is you're taking your sun sign and you're putting the sun's sign on the ascendant for the month ahead or the year ahead or the week ahead or the day ahead or whatever you're reading for. And you're giving prominence to the solar symbolism by putting it in the first house. And people do find that it's accurate. I think because this is all symbolic and divinatory, that there's a lot of different approaches. Sometimes people read for their moon sign, right? Which would be putting your moon sign on the ascendant. I'm a Libra moon. Okay, well, let's read for the month ahead, right? As though the moon in Libra is in the ascendant because you have a moon in Libra. You see, then all of the transits will be read moving through different houses relative to putting the moon on the ascendant. So why, again, so these are different approaches, they're different divinatory styles. The reason I like the ascendant is because it's the only one that's going to line up 1-to-1 with the way your chart is actually laid out. And I think that that has the most value. I think it has the most accuracy after doing this for a long time. That's what I've seen anyway. So, and again, like if you're ever reading transits on a day-to-day, month-by-month, year-by-year basis in any time of astrology up until modern astrology, you would primarily be reading that in terms of the way your chart is actually laid out. You're plugging those planets right into the arrangement of your birth chart according to whatever sign is rising. So if you track transits that way, why would a monthly horoscope be any different? It seems like it's a totally, to use a sun sign on the ascendant is a totally different way of reading the transits into your chart. And to me, that's just crossing too many wires, and it's going to get me confused. And I think it tends to confuse other people. So, but I'm someone who also really likes an economy of craft. I like fewer things done well, and that's part of my mood. That's part of my personality. So I'm not suggesting that you couldn't get something out of this. It's just I tend to get a lot of static in my head, and I lose signal as a reader when I'm using approaches that cross the view of the chart I'm working with in too many different ways.
Okay, cool. So what about people who say that they don't fully identify with their rising sign? I find that I've got friends who say this, and that's partly why they like to read for their sun sign, because they just don't feel like their rising sign. I mean, I guess my question is, if that's the case, first of all, maybe why is that the case?
Mm-hmm.
And then if they are going to read for their sun sign, is that is that going to maybe more tell the story of the flow of events in their life, or what they I'm just trying to figure out how that would feel different if you were reading for your sun sign.
Well, I'll answer this like this. So let's just say that you're looking at this chart, and you're like, I don't feel like a Libra rising, fair enough. But the thing is that your birth chart, for a couple of things, and some of these might sound kind of crabby, but first of all, it doesn't matter what you feel, because astrology is not about it's sort of like people in modern astrology, there's been so much emphasis on the chart being like some kind of character profile that you identify with. And the truth is that, like if you cast a tarot spread and you look at it and you're like, I just really don't feel identified with these cards. I mean, it's like, well, you don't have to be identified with the cards for them to speak to your life or to speak to what's going on with you. In fact, it's probably a good thing that you don't feel identified with a bunch of cards. Similarly, it's probably good that you don't feel identified with a sign or a planet. So I think that one of the things that comes up is that people end up trying to massage the chart or turn it or move things around to help them. It's like, I want to find the version of my chart that I like the most, or that I'm most comfortable with, that I feel good about. And that's not really the goal of astrology. So that's my first comment, and people can obviously disagree with me about that. But so that's the first thing I would say. The next thing I would say, though, is that most of the time when it comes to the rising sign being able to accurately speak to character, most people don't have an advanced enough understanding of astrology to be able to do that. So it's not that they don't feel identified with it. It's that they don't understand astrology well enough to know what they're doing. And I don't mean that any offense by that. It's just the truth. So for example, in this chart, let's just take a quick look. In this chart, understanding who you are is nowhere near as simple as just identifying as a Libra, right? If this were your birth chart, first of all, you have the moon in the first house when you were born, if this was a birth chart. So you don't have, first of all, now we're talking about a predominantly lunar person who's a kind of lunar, it's like a lunar person with a Venus airy twist. So you have to just let's just write it down. If you want to figure out how this represents you, it has really very little to do with Libra. It's lunar with airy Venusian twist. We'll just call it like that. Then you have to look at the host of the first house, Venus. Venus is in the second house in Scorpio, right? So now you're blending those things, and you can take the chain further too if you wanted to. For example, the sun in this chart has a pretty close sextile, though it's a weak one, to the ascendant, right? And that's going to give you a little bit of like a little light soul, like a hint of, you know how they do in their wine tasting or whatever. There's a hint of almond in this or something. Like there's a hint of sun in this as well. And unless you're able to understand the layering of influences that is going into the description of character vis-a-vis the rising place, not just the rising sign. The emphasis on sign is very, very modern. We don't read that way throughout traditional astrology. You're not a Libra. Your Libra is playing the host to the ascending place, which is home to the moon. The moon in Venus's sign. Venus is debilitated in Scorpio. Mars opposes the moon from the 7th. All of that would be taken into consideration to describe character. And unless you're doing that kind of an analysis, for a lot of people, you're not going to feel identified with your rising sign. And then you're going to see something else in your chart that stands out a little bit more, or that you do feel a little bit more identified with. And you're going to go, well, that must be it. I'm really my Venus, or I'm really my Mars, or I'm really something else in the chart, or I really feel like my sun sign, or, you know, something else that isn't, because this, again, someone might read this and just go like, I don't feel like a Libra. Well, no, you have a Venus and Mars's sign. I wouldn't feel like a Libra either. You know what I mean? Like, so that level of analysis, what I'm saying is not that, I'm really not trying to insult anyone, but it's like so much of the time when people say, I don't feel identified with this, they just don't know enough about the traditional way of analyzing or breaking down the ascendant and its layering in the chart to be able to understand what the chart is actually saying about character, which is frustrating if you're a professional astrologer, of course, because you're learning how to do all of this. And in the meantime, you know, there's a lot of like lay people out there who are essentially playing with something that they don't understand, and then saying things like, well, I'm not my rising sign, I'm this or I'm that. It's like, well, it's not open for debate. You know what I mean? It's like you don't get to just be whatever you want to be. And so the chart does weigh in. And when you learn more about it, it weighs in very precisely in these ways. Now, I say that, and I say, you know, there's still a lot of different symbols in the chart. And so there's going to be a lot of different flexibility in terms of, like, we're still very multidimensional people. And that there's a whole host of symbols here that are probably going to, if there's something that you feel your rising sign is not describing, you probably are right about that. And even with a layered approach like this, there may also be another planet in the chart that's speaking very loudly and could weigh in on what you're like as a person, or how you identify. But the point is that wouldn't change your horoscope for the month, right? It wouldn't, because the horoscope for the month really has nothing to do with how you feel about who you are. The rising sign horoscope for the month is going to have to do with what's going to happen in what areas of life. And you know, who we are is something that we're exploring and bringing to bear on those experiences. But you don't need to feel identified with your rising sign in some really explicit way for rising sign horoscopes to accurately describe what's going to happen during a month ahead.
Cool. Okay. So I guess, you know, for me, what you're saying is it's good news. It's good news that we're not limited by one sign now. You know, we've got the whole chart to play with, and surely that is more accurately going to reflect us as individuals, rather than just saying, you know, I'm a this or that.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, like, part of, like, I could understand how some of what I'm saying, because it came across for me the same way when I was first studying, is that some of it feels like you're trying to say to people that you shouldn't have a say in your own chart or something like that. But really, ancient astrology was um, not nearly as much about trying to identify your selfhood and your character in the chart as it is today. And so when people feel that, like, my chart really needs to reflect how I feel about myself and how I act and behave, in some ways we're really limiting both the chart and ourselves. And so yeah, it's almost better. In fact, I tell my students this all the time. It's almost better if you don't focus on trying to get the chart to mirror how you feel about yourself.
Cool. Well, I think those are all my questions for today. Thank you.
Yeah, this was a great one. So check your rising sign horoscopes. I always tell people you can read it for your sun or your rising, but this is a good explanation as to why I would recommend the rising sign. All right. Well, thank you, Kat, for being here today. Remember, everybody, Kickstarter runs through the end of the year. If you enjoy this content, if you share it, like it, subscribe to it, please consider pitching in. I really appreciate your support. Pick up a reward or half off to one of my classes when you do so. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to 691 pretty quickly. All right. Thank you, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye.